Thank you, Jim. Hi, all. And first of all, thanks to Jim for the intro. I will try turning my camera on, but during the course of presentation, if the internet starts dropping, I will turn off the camera. Just briefly, before we dive into today's topic, my name is Ajla, as Jim has said, and I am with Market Development Facility in Fiji, which is an economic program implemented by the Palladium and Swiss Contact. Since 2012, we work in 5 countries, and we partner with private sector and government bodies to create additional jobs and income and help workers and farmers thrive. On the topic of women's economic empowerment, we is central to MDF's work, and it's integrated from sector selection to designing, intervention, and measuring them. Today's focus will be mostly on measurement or the nuances how to measure women's economic empowerment beyond the obvious. To get from theory to practice, because saying it is usually easier than actually getting it done, to get into integrating WE into economic programming, there is not really a magic formula or one-size-fits-all policy. I will try to show you, and we will examine together what MDF did and how we developed the system that captures women's empowerment, and what are some of the challenges we face, including the tips that helped us on the path. To even get to the point of measuring women's economic empowerment, we first needed to organize our thinking around it, and how do we lay foundations for getting to measurement. As the thinking guide in MDF, we have developed a women's economic empowerment framework, which outline what we meant for us. For MDF, we meant going beyond just the transaction point, going beyond having cash in hand, but also the power and ability of these women to make decisions and act on them. Several other steps have been taken to ensure we, from encouraging creative thinking or out-of-the-box thinking and developing business cases or interventions, and ensuring fully integration between results measurement and implementation teams so that the feedback loop is continuous. What we ultimately wanted was pretty simple. Women do constitute 50% of the economy, and they need to benefit from the economic growth. So the reason why we actually started the whole this was not out of the pure just need, but also because we have seen the women along the value chains in the context we are working in, with their roles and responsibilities being more or less visible, and with them having different constraints that they are facing along those value chains. We saw in one of the examples where a household can earn significantly higher income, but at the expense of women not sleeping or not getting enough time with children. So we wanted these women, their roles and their constraints to be visible, but also to ensure no harm principle. MDF practice in 5 different contexts showed us several patterns when it comes to women's economic empowerment, which we have then roughly divided into access and agency. Access simply meant women's access to assets, to services, to opportunities, networks, or any information that she might find useful, while agency, and this is where the measurement also gets interested, included also women's ability to decide and act particularly on the access. Access also, with agency, we wanted to cover workloads and influence on social norms, that are happening in the context where women are operating. We have seen it quite vital to have both of these areas strongly linked to each other and strongly integrated, even though they are on the opposite side of the spectrum. Because, again, it comes from a very experience. One of the examples we have had, or to be honest, several of them, we have had women at the transaction point. We have had an intervention where women were mostly the sales agents, but as they come home, they needed to hand over the cash or all their earnings to fathers and husbands. From a typical access perspective, they have been given a new market, and our story could have ended there. But for us, we wanted to see, whether that's really an empowerment and whether these women consider themselves empowered as long as this is the case of them handing out the money to somebody else. So that's to ensure that this impact of our interventions is sustainable and it continues to outlive us and the project. We did not see it enough to provide access, though it is our entry point in interventions, but we also wanted to make sure that with our interventions and with the access provided, we are trying to impact the agency. Again, from theory to practice, in practice, we took a slightly practical approach, and besides using the framework to guide our thinking, research, and results measurements, we have simply started asking, when designing sectors, when designing interventions, we have started asking very simple questions on where are the women, what are they doing, what are the roles they are playing, and what are the ultimately constraints they are facing and why. You can ask as many questions as you want, but it's a simple notion of how does our intervention contribute to women's economic empowerment has to be answered. As an example to that, I could share Fiji, one intervention that we have had in Fiji garments industry. Fiji garments industry used to be a backbone of the economy, and nowadays it's facing high turnover and high absenteeism rates. This has been the case in many development contexts, and I guess Fiji is not the isolated case. And we have seen this problem being dealt with in a simple manner, just retrain the new kids on the block so that these women that are leaving the sector can be easily replaced. MDF, several years ago, took a slightly different approach to this. We went in the field and we wanted to see why are these women, first of all, leaving? What are their constraints that are preventing them, if any, that are preventing them to stay in the sector? And we have seen a pattern emerge that majority of women that were leaving were in the age group between 25 and 40 at the peak of their production power, because the reason was simple. There was nobody to take care of their children, or they were uncomfortable. Majority of them was actually uncomfortable leaving the children with the strangers. So MDF approached the issue with one of the companies who is hiring 700 workers and who is facing an annual staff turnover of 14%. And we have asked both the company has asked us, what can we do to prevent these women from leaving, and what can I do as a private sector, not to continue reinvesting in training staff and upskilling them, because upskilling staff takes a long time, and company was facing losing orders because of that. The out-of-box thinking that I have mentioned did take a few months. The deliberation has taken several months, actually, and that is how the idea of in-factory childcare services was born, and the childcare service was finally opened in January of this year. Out-of-box and creative thinking and thinking about keeping these women at work not only supported the company's bottom line by not needing to reinvest in training new staff continuously, but also they were able to meet the demand and meet their orders. But where the real benefit has come is for the women. Besides advancing economically, because they could work, because they could go back to work and earn their hourly wages, which they were otherwise losing. The women have shared with us that the majority of impacts came on their well-being, as we have classified it under this domain, but what they have shared is that their state of mind was calm. When we asked that, what does that actually mean, they said that they had challenges at work focusing because they didn't know that their children were safe or a child was safe. So knowing that they're close and they can peek at them anytime they want, that enabled them to focus on the work and meet their orders. Ultimately, this is just one example how digging beyond the access to work and digging beyond the access of childcare can provide agency for women. And ultimately, how we approach the intervention depends on the idea itself. However, in MDF, where it all lines up is in results measurement. In results measurement, what we have decided is when outlining the logic of the intervention, the results chain or the theory of change, however we decide to call it, we have added wherever the logical box is relevant for women's economic empowerment, we have added a we box or a we flag. The purpose wasn't to add something colorful in our results chain. The purpose was basically threefold: to remind us on that level of the logic to think about the women, to, at that point, when we go for a monitoring visit, when we go for an assessment to talk to beneficiaries, that we interview women and that we ask we-related questions. The integration in the RM and starting from results chain was quite simple in terms that both implementation and results measurement teams use results chain to check the progress of the intervention, to check whether something is happening on time or not, and to raise any red flags if something is not going according to plan. So as soon as we see the results chain, now we see that we have to talk about women, and encourages us on thinking from the outset of the intervention. As in any program, MDF not being the only case, results chain, our development is followed by the development of indicators for every specific box outlisted. And what we have decided is, besides having gender disaggregated indicators into number of male or female who have attended training, who have been hired, we have decided, and these indicators are usually quite sufficient for covering access, we wanted to cover agency as well in our measurements, and we have decided to cover it with supplementary questions related to these indicators. The questions which we tend to ask during the assessments are around workload, about decision-making power, about the equal pay of women and men. The reason we have opted for this is to help us see the patterns, which we can then bring back to the office, and during the course of measurement, usually around 3 years, we can see if the patterns are changing or not. It's important to know, and that's that's a question that we often hear is, are these women-related questions? These are by no means women-related questions. If you have the opportunity to ask a male counterpart the same question, you should. We have had just, first of all, to see the differences in responses and to check also whether these answers are changing throughout the course of years. We have had, one of the questions we tend to ask is who decides on the income usage in the household, and we have had a number, I think 100 of responses where a female head of household says that a joint decision making is taking place in that household, while male respondents tend to say, oh, I'm the man of the house and I make all the decisions about money. And it's quite interesting to see progress and changes of these responses throughout the year as people start earning additional income, as people start contributing more with their work to additional income, how these patterns change. Measuring these nuances, the shifts or overall measurements beyond numbers remains, and it will remain to be a challenging task. By this, I'm not saying that the life of RM specialists in general isn't challenging, but measuring agency and measuring beyond numbers comes with a certain set of challenges on their own. Reason for that is mostly because it is multidimensional, and it's very both internal and external to individual, and there are many different aspects that are impacting it. And for example, if you as an RM specialist hear some answers, for example, for a woman, if she says, I'm not making any decisions about income, you understanding whether that's being empowerment or not as the changes happen can be very, very subjective. So it is, measuring agency is in the eyes of the beholder or the interviewer. Let me give an example where we had a particular challenge. We had a farmer who had benefited from our intervention and gained additional income through it. And since that happened, he has involved his daughter completely in farm management and decision-making around farm inputs and whether they should buy certain implements or supplements or not. However, his wife had little or no say in it. When we have come back with that information, we had a big discussion whether that's an empowerment or not, and we ultimately understood that it is a topic for another discussion. We need to see a few years of this. But what was really important is capturing this household and how dynamics work so we can see whether they ultimately change. Through this example and several similar ones, 3 broad questioning areas in MDF have emerged. The first questioning area was whether a woman has ability and negotiation power to influence decisions, particularly economic decision or use of income, whether there are external factors which are limiting or enhancing her agency. For example, living in the community which is more or less traditional, how are they going to react to certain changes? And whether our intervention or the change that is about to make or it has made is making a difference to the quality of women's life. These broad questioning areas, broad questioning domains, let's say, have been further divided in MDF into dimensions which tackle influence. Influence over household income allocation, influence over household income activity. Does the woman have a say what crop the household will be doing or not? Influence on the change on the social norm within the community she's living in. But we have also started looking at the other parameters such as reduction in workload which we have seen in all our contexts being one of the major constraints women face, or just scarcity of time, to perceived recognition in her community, whether through our intervention she has been perceived differently, of more importance, or of that her word is more important now, and overall improved well-being. We have decided to develop a conceptual tool and framework around it, which we have to be honest, we are still piloting. The reason mostly being is visualizing change. Agency is very hard to report, it's very hard to narrate, it comes always in a narrative, unlike gender disaggregated indicators. So we wanted to have a visual of changes that are happening over the years. As an example, I would like to give you Fiji sugarcane case, where in Fiji, for example, sugarcane farming households are highly dependent on sugarcane production, and it is a key income generating activity for many households, and majority of households are using it as a secondary income source. Throughout the years, over the last 20, 30 years, sugarcane production in Fiji has started decreasing, and due to several reasons, one of them being increasing costs of inputs, rural-urban drift, as everywhere else, and labor shortage. Labor shortage was particularly interesting one because there were lesser and lesser interested workers to be cane cutting gangs, and the ones that have remained to cut the cane or to harvest the cane have started charging exuberant prices, which farming households couldn't make. Women in these households participate in a subtle roles, supporting roles, such as weeding or fertilizer application. But during the harvesting season, which tends to last from July to November, they play an important role in catering to laborers. That means that they are spending the entire day cooking food, preparing refreshments, and taking it to the field to people working there. MDF in 2015 and 16 introduced the intervention in which we wanted to counter the decline and the shortage of labor with providing households the access to sugarcane mechanical harvester. The monetary impact of the intervention has been, we can say, in the bigger context, has been limited because it mostly has resulted from saving costs on food and refreshments, as mechanical harvesting time has reduced overall harvesting from 4 to 5 months to just a week or two. But when we started digging deeper, what if there is any other impact on the household, we have seen that what we really didn't expect is a massive impact on women and their empowerment. I said before, cane harvesting was characterized by 5 months, 19 working hours, and majority of women we have interviewed has been waking up 3 o'clock in the morning to start preparing food and spending the time in the field all the way up to 11 in the afternoon, 11 at night, barely getting 6 hours of sleep. In majority of the cases, it was 4 to 5. With access to sugarcane harvesting, they have all said that they could sleep for the first time after 20, 30 years dealing with sugarcane. They could sleep longer. What was really interesting is that all of these women we have spoken to said that they have ultimately the decision-making power, how they want to utilize their free time now. And whether they wanted to sleep, there was variance in responses. Some women wanted to sleep, some women wanted to spend time with their children. Some of them started their own vegetable gardens, But what really came striking is that finally, after so many years, the decision on time has been taken exclusively by them. The impact, besides writing in its narrative, we wanted to show in this spider diagram with actually an outward movement in the reduction of workload, improved well-being, and for the women, for the small portion that have said that they have started their own economic activity, we have shown influence over income allocation, because as they started working more on their vegetable gardens, they could decide on income from that secondary source. This measurement of this particular intervention several years to see, and it did come with certain challenges. The tracking of the responses hasn't been easy, and tracking and finding the same respondents if another team goes in the field, of course, gives a challenge. And I will list you now some of the challenges which we have faced in measuring this and many other interventions, and how we tried to solve them. One main challenge that we have seen is that we often get a question: should we go for scale or for depth in interviews? Whether we would like to interview more people with shorter interviews or lesser number of people with more in-depth interviews. And it's always the question of sampling, it's always a question of being expensive and going back to same respondents. And it is ultimately time-consuming, because depending on your questionnaire, it can last for up to 2 hours. Well, for us, what was really important in this case was striking a balance. We have decided to include several related questions in all of the assessments that we do, but those that we find particularly interesting, we dig even deeper. The second challenge which we have often faced is inability to talk to your target group. Ultimately, you would like to talk to women, and you would like to understand what are they doing and what are the challenges they're facing. In Fiji, I have had a case, particularly in the intervention that I have just mentioned. Me and my colleague have been told that we cannot talk to the wife. For what we have tried to understand the reason, we never managed. So during the whole course of interview with a male head of household, the woman was sitting in the doorstep, and she was not allowed to talk. But every time she disagreed with something that her husband had said, she was nodding and humming in our direction, trying to vocalize her disagreement. So these things will happen. It remains being a challenge in the development world, but try other ways. The third part is informed consent, confidentiality, and data and interviewee protection. That also remains being a challenge, but mostly because you, as an RM specialist or implementation teams during interviews, you will hear many, many things, some of which you may find shocking, some of which you may agree or disagree with, and ultimately they will all be emotionally draining when you are dealing with agencies. Sometimes you, as a human being, might have a need to react if you feel certain injustice is happening. However, ensuring impartial questioning and protection of interviewers is a must, because somebody is sitting across you there, and it's confining in you, it's sharing very difficult things with you. So your reaction to it, no matter how human, it also has to be impartial, and it has to be, you're an observant, and you should stay that. Sometimes with our both implementation teams and results measurement teams, we have seen the pattern of fear of failure. And we have also had people going in the field saying, you know, I will not get the data. Why should I even bother asking this difficult question? Well, the simple answer to that is just do. It does get easier. These questions are hard to ask, and the household you're entering might not be and will be uncomfortable answering these questions, but you should ask if you have the opportunity anyway. We had a case in 2017. We went to a village where we wanted to see whether women have been trained being a tour guide and whether they're utilizing the training and how. And we have interviewed quite a big sample of women, and we have had 100% same response. So, you know, that would be a perfect case scenario for RM specialists. You know, your sample tells you, you know, 100% same response, but we did know, and we do know that, you know, the life isn't perfect, and life of RM specialists even less so. So we said, okay, we regrouped, we figured out what's happening, so we regrouped, and we said we're just going to stop interviewing. It makes no sense to do it because we are seeing that, you know, feeling that answers are being basically, you know, taught by heart. But, you know, we have still decided in this particular case to spend the time with the village to understand why is this happening, if possible. So we just stayed in the community hall, getting to know women better, getting to know men better. And 6 hours after, believe it or not, 6 hours after, one of the women has taken one of my colleagues aside and told her that actually women have been trained, but they haven't utilized the training. So my colleague did manage to dig deeper in that case, and she asked, why haven't you utilized the training? I mean, if you have been trained in being a tour guide. And the woman has shared that the training never included really important part of tour guiding, which is history and understanding the history of the village or the area that the tourists are going through. And we never saw that coming. We never saw that that could be a problem, neither did our partner. In Fiji, history is taught usually from a father to the son, and the girls and women of this particular village have had no chance of knowing the history. So the main reason, because they didn't utilize the training, was embarrassment that they don't know their own history. We took the lessons back to the office and to the partner, and partners took a really proactive role in ensuring that women are tour guides and that they know the history. So when we came back last year in 2018, we wanted to see whether that's happening. So we specifically looked for a woman that has shared the information for us amongst other people that we wanted to talk to. And she said that she has started tour guiding, and during 2018, she has led a total of 17 trekking. You know, she was trekking with the tourists. And we have asked her a very simple question: how did you learn the history? And she told us, well, one night actually, before the morning, I woke up my husband and I told him, you know, tell me my history. This is my village too, and I deserve to know. In case MDF, in this particular case, if we have been satisfied with the access, yes, the training has been provided, and they have participated, we have seen them there, we couldn't get the nuances of understanding the social norms and understanding how social norms with a good investment and with good intervention can change. That's one of our tips. Several other tips for measuring women's economic empowerment remain being, you know, interview both household heads. This is, you know, everybody knows this. I don't have to tell you about it, but we had so many instances where a male head of household has told us, you will not interview my wife because I know her well enough to give responses on her behalf. So in those cases, we still, if possible, push really hard to interview a woman, outside of the house in any way possible, just because, participatory research does matter, and we couldn't make assumptions about, neither agency nor access from a second-hand response. The second tip is asking difficult questions. It does get easier and it doesn't. You should practice with your colleagues. It's not really easy to come into a stranger's house, you being a stranger to them too, and saying, what are you spending your money on? But the information that you get over a course of several years of monitoring eventually does pay off. And start small, start baby steps, one question at a time. Third thing that we found extremely important is connecting with beneficiaries. In the village that I have just mentioned, where women have been tour guides, we have decided to spend time with them, regardless of whether we are going to get responses or not. We have decided to understand them better. From my perspective, I was considered a stranger, I was considered a spy, but that comes, the next part. Don't take rejection personally. This is a very hard one. You will ask yourself, if somebody else has asked the question, would they get the response? Maybe it was me. It is a really hard skill to master, not to be personally offended if somebody tells you, I'm not going to answer your question. But what you are trying to establish is the relationship that goes beyond this economic transaction and business relationship. And you shouldn't take it, that way. The nurturing it, starts with the first interview and starts with the first failed interview. That I can tell you from my experience. The way to collect information is not only, having a paper and a pen there, being all teacher-like. That hasn't helped for us. What worked for us was really being creative in collecting the information. We have had our MDF female team members cooking, washing dishes, and babysitting in Fiji highlands just to get the answer. Because ultimately, somebody is taking their precious time to talk to you, and maybe they can't afford it. So make them comfortable. Tell them that you're going to help whatever they're doing if they could talk to you. Sometimes what also has helped for us, especially in Fiji context, is first talking about yourself. That first the person whom you are talking to understands you before they're comfortable opening up to your question. And the last one, always the simple one, and always the one we tend to forget, is teaching development language. We have had instances where, people do not even understand what we are asking. Imagine if somebody comes to your home and asks you, what do you do with additional income earned? How many creative answers and how, if any, would come to your mind? So what we have started doing is making it really simple. We have started asking questions, if you were to earn at this particular moment $100 more, what would be the first thing you would spend it on? And people tend to give responses on these questions. And then we ask, what is the second thing you would spend it on? So, and then based on those responses, we could ask then, how do you prioritize this spending? How do you make decisions, and who ultimately makes decisions? And that's all from me, folks. I thank you for staying with me, and thank you for listening. I hope that it was helpful guiding you through some of the MDF experiences and challenges. And just take this opportunity to thank all my MDF colleagues who have taken me for so many different mentoring visits and enabled me to share these experiences with you. And I think now we will open for Q&A session.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Ajla, for the presentation. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Great. So we are going to start with the last and interesting and maybe hardest question, which came from Jessen Katra. Everyone else, if you have any questions which you want us to get through in the next 15 minutes, then please just type them into the chat box. And yes, we are going to give a record link May. So you can probably see the question, Ajla, but just to repeat it for everybody, yes. The question is, how do we consider other sexes, LGBTI, in WE programming?
Okay. I thought the first difficult one will be around disability, but okay, let's do this one. Depends, I guess I can talk from MDF's perspective, and you can talk from other experiences that you have had. In Fiji, there are still certain challenges around LGBTIQ population. Considering them, we haven't had, I have to be honest, we haven't had the case yet where we have fully integrated this cross-cutting issue into empowerment and economic empowerment. But I think as in disability, this will eventually come, and we should start thinking about it. Adam, have you had a case of inclusion of LGBTI population?
Basically, no. Like maybe it should have been an issue in the programs I've worked in, but it hasn't. Jessen, I wondered if you have a mic that's working, could you speak about it, like you said, in a humanitarian context?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yes. Well, not in a development context or in market systems work, but when I was involved in the humanitarian world, in a major response, we usually did making sure that women, female are included in terms of being consulted and part of the decision making and benefiting basically in whatever support is given. But recently, about 3 years ago, we did encounter in the Philippines issues about concerns about those from the lesbians, gays, transsexuals, and intersexuals. So we attempted to expand our understanding of gender programming to not only look at vulnerable populations from a male and female perspective, but also look at the concerns of other sexes in the community. So it was one of the early attempts to do that, and I'm just keen about if it has also, there has been attempt as well in we efforts, because we would be somewhat nearer being more gender inclusive in our work. So that's my curiosity about the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Jessen. I think probably if other people have experiences they want to share, feel free to type it into the chat box or unmute yourself and speak. We also have a good question from Megan Bolden, which is, do you have established questions for your dimensions on the radar diagram and how you code these questions? So yes. Ajla, could you take that question?
Yes, yes, I will. Yes, we do have questionnaires for all the 7 domains. We also have a 2018 paper that's measuring beyond income that compiles or encodes or gives how we are coding these answers. So with all the interested participants, Adam, if I can ask you, when sharing the recording, can I also kindly ask you to share our paper on it?
Oh, yeah.
And that is really looking forward to you trying out, because we are also piloting it. the diagrams, the spider diagrams, and related questionnaires. MDF is really looking forward to any of you trying to use it and see whether it will be useful for your context that you're working it, and getting back to us with any suggestions that you might have so we can edit the questionnaires together. We have just also shared it with CARE Australia, so they're going to pilot it as well. So I will be sharing the paper and the questions. Feel free to use it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. We'll definitely share that when we send it round. Thanks for all the questions which are coming in. If you want to send a question, if you send it to everyone rather than the DCED, that's better because then everyone can see it. Let's go back a bit to, I thought, a good question asked by Lena, which was, how do you motivate your team and management to be interested in women's economic empowerment? And this is a question both for we, but also for MRM more generally. So Ajla, I'll ask you to answer, and then Nabanita, if you have any thoughts on that, that would be great. So yeah, Ajla, what do you think?
Okay, for us, what has really helped setting the precedent that we is everybody's job. It wasn't something that was negotiable, basically. But we did try to, besides, installing this idea that it's everybody's job, we did try, and we do still try to motivate people to think. What really helped us is the first success case, going in the field and seeing these changes, and then letting the implementation team talk about it to a wider audience or to their colleagues. And press has, inspired, has really helped us and is helping us to continue with integrating we. There will be, and there have been challenges. There is always, there could be questions. Why me? Is it really my job? Can we do it next time? But what really helps us is the persistence and sharing experiences that we have had with people on how the changes we have seen impacted these, human beings on so many levels. And that it is ultimately our job, if we are to, to impact and to improve the economy in the country, which we are mandated to do, there is no chance that we can exclude any group, particularly the group that is constituting 50% of the economy. And particularly from the perspective that if we are not asking these questions, we might be doing harm. And that's something that we should really try to avoid. So it remains an ongoing challenge, but I think from MDF Fiji perspective, it is almost no challenge at all. But I see the point. Why is this question being made?
Thank you. Because this is a really important question, I think we'll spend a bit more time on it. And if anyone else has any advice, then please type it into the chat box. But Nabanita, do you want to give your thoughts on?
Thanks, Adam. I think Ajla really answered it correctly. And just one thing to add to it, I think when a project thinks about we, it really depends on the outlook. Is it now a secondary thing that, is it just a measurement thing that ultimately I'm going to train this many people, or I reduce, I improve income for these many people, and how many of them are women? Or do you really see that as an objective of the project to create a more gender balanced economy, in which case it is really up to management to drive that thinking in all strategies, all interventions, rather than really focusing it through one narrow perspective. So yeah, for me it's really about how the management drives it as an overarching cross-cutting theme across all the work they do, rather than seeing it as a secondary thing which is added to different interventions.
Thank you. That's really helpful. What I find interesting about this question of how do you drive interest in we is that the answers are often very similar to the question of how do you drive interest in MRM more generally. So good leadership, good integration, making sure that it produces something valuable for people.
And
So,
Adam, if I can
yeah,
please
please
add
add.
on to that, it's also making, there is a notion that MRM and we are scary. It is a way of, if we find time and sometimes we don't, being, making it a bit more creative. It's not all about, it's not Excel, and don't be afraid of the formulas, There is some logic. So just making it more creative, thinking about creative results chains, doing results chains, and outlining logic of the things that are not, economic programming. Just to get people comfortable with that is the first step that we have taken when we have seen it very useful.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot. Let's go to Besnik's question, who has a slightly more technical question about the financial model that you chose in the childcare services case. And Besnik from Risi, Albania asks, how did you secure the sustainability of this approach?
Okay. Should I? So the financial investment, and so the MDF takes cost-sharing principle, but I have to say in this particular intervention, the partner did take a really high initial investment, which the MDF's crucial benefit and crucial addition to this business model was understanding and securing the partner that these women, through the demand survey that we have done, was ensuring that they won't leave and that they're leaving because of they have nobody to take care of the children. We did provide financial support in architectural design of this of the child in factory childcare, while the partner took all the other necessary investments, which have been, I have to say, quite high. In terms of sustainability of the intervention, Adam, can you just please, is there any particular in mind, or is this related to?
The question was in relation to the financial model that you chose in the childcare services case, is all the question says. Does that help, or maybe Besnik can explain his question a bit?
Yes.
Can I talk?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the webinar. Brilliant stuff. I'm very glad to kind of meet you all, and I'm particularly interested in the childcare services case because we are in the process of designing a similar, let's say, case of ours here in Albania, and the way we are doing it is through the Chamber of Manufacturing businesses, which is basically almost the same as Ajla was explaining. And one of the things that we are doing, we also don't cover a lot of costs in these cases. So we don't cover infrastructure costs and stuff like that. So in this sense, this was my question, kind of related to this sense, when we talk about the financial model. How deep, let's say, is the MDF kind of supporting, and how much of the cost is the partner or the company taking over?
Okay. MDF works on the principle as Risi, Albania. There was no infrastructural investment made. The overall ratio was, if I'm not mistaken, MDF was doing slightly less than 20%, while about 80% of the cost has been carried by the private company. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, of course, you're welcome. And there was a question, I think, about ensuring sustainability. I'm not sure whether this was related to this particular intervention of childcare or some other one. In the childcare, what we have seen is, this was our entry, and we wanted to see and we wanted to probe what's happening in the sector. Some of the most recent developments, and I will have to just tell you one more time, it has just opened in January 2019, exactly 4 months ago. We have seen interest from several other companies, not necessarily in garment sector, wanting to actually coming to MDF saying, what have you done with Mark 1 in this particular case, and how can we get childcare service in our premises? So we are seeing some traction happening. We are seeing also the traction from the government and from other programs who understand that early education system is important for both children and the working mothers. But yeah, no concrete investments have been made yet, but we are anticipating that several other companies will replicate the business model.
Great. Thanks, Besnik, for your question. This brings us to 12 o'clock, at least UK time, which is the end of the webinar. So thank you very much, Ajla, for presenting the webinar, and everybody for joining. Maybe I should quickly answer Hoaz's final question. So we'll share the full report, but for language differences, I think Ajla would have taken translators or had the interviews in local language. So the important thing there is to have someone who really understands the context, who can guide you as to what are the different languages in the different areas, and to have a team capable of helping you with the interviews. We do have a feedback form. So I think Lucretia is going to, thank you very much, is going to send a feedback form. If you have a minute now, it is very quick, and we'll be really grateful if you could fill it in and give us your feedback on this webinar and tell us what else you want webinars on.
Thank you.
So thanks, Ajla and Nabanita. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much one more time for listening, and if you have any additional questions to any of us and Adam, together with the recording, we will be sharing MDF's recent papers on women's economic empowerment that you can utilize the best way you can. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ajla. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.